As you probably know, this is the month of Ramadan and it's a holy month for Muslims. So, in this month, frequently in some of the episodes, I will talk about Islamic philosophy, theology, history, and that also includes life of Prophet Muhammad, about which I'm going to talk today. In fact, in the next few episodes, I will talk about the journey and life of Prophet Muhammad, beginning with the birth and early childhood of the Prophet, which is what I will do in this episode. For this purpose, I have this book with me called The First Muslim, written by Leslie Hazelton. It's a wonderful biography of Prophet Muhammad and uses early Islamic sources to make this interesting biography. So I'm going to read a few passages from the book which talk about Prophet Muhammad's early childhood, starting with his birth. So stay with me as I narrate these passages. If you believe in omens, the fact that Muhammad was born an orphan is not a good one. Most biographers make little of it, moving on quickly as though this were just a quirk of fate not worth dwelling on. Yet his orphanhood bears the psychological weight that often determines history, especially if the legend of his birth is to be believed. He was almost never born at all. Just hours before he was conceived, his grandfather nearly killed his father. And as though the father had been spared only long enough to fulfill his singular role, he would then die far from home, unaware that he even had a son. The grandfather was Abdul Muttalib, the venerable leader of the ruling Quraysh tribe and a central figure in the short but spectacular lore of Mecca. As a young man, he had excavated the Zamzam well, a freshwater spring hard by the Kaaba sanctuary, which attracted pilgrims from all over Arabia. Rumors of the spring's existence had existed for as long as anyone could remember. Some said that it had been first discovered by Hagar after she gave birth to Ishmael, and that it had been tapped by Abraham only to be abandoned and filled in over the centuries, its location forgotten until Abdul Muttalib rediscovered it. All sorts of miraculous things reportedly happened when he opened it up. By some accounts, a snake guarded the entrance so fiercely that nobody dared approach until a giant eagle swooped down to snatch it up into the sky. Others maintain that masses of treasure were found in the spring, from exquisitely wrought jewelry to swords, life-sized gazelles made out of solid gold. But by far the most chilling account is one that will be hauntingly familiar to anyone who knows the biblical story of Abraham's near sacrifice of his son. Since it was he who had rediscovered Zamzam, Abdul Muttalib claimed that the profitable monopoly on providing its water to pilgrims belonged to his clan, the clan called Hashims, one of the four primary extended families banded together to form the Quraysh tribe. There were other springs in Mecca, of course, but none so centrally located, none with such sweet water, and none with such a powerful legend. So it was hardly a surprise when the other Quraysh clan leaders challenged his claim to control its waters, thus questioning both his motives and his honor. What did come as a surprise was his response. He silenced his critics with a terrifying vow. If he had 10 sons who survived into maturity to protect him and to uphold the honor of the Hashims, he swore, he would sacrifice one of them right there in the open precinct surrounding the Kaaba beside the spring. Eventually, the time came for Abdul Muttalib to fulfill his vow. A man's word was his bond, and he had given his. He had no choice in the matter. He was to hold his head high. The only question was which son to sacrifice, and since this was an impossible choice for any father to make, the traditional way would decide for him. And through the traditional ways, through a ritual, the name that came up was of Abdul Muttalib's youngest and favorite son, Abdullah. But as it turned out, his life was somehow spared, and Prophet Muhammad's father, Abdullah, went on to live his life. But he didn't really live a long life. He died even before seeing his son Muhammad. So, when Muhammad was born, he was born without a father. And to be born without a father in those times was to be born without an inheritance or any hope of one. A son could not inherit until he had reached maturity. If his father died before that, everything he possessed, it went to an adult male relative who would then assume the responsibility for the family left behind. In a traditional tribal society, this had worked well. On the assumption that there was no such thing as personal wealth, only the good of the tribe, it assured that no member of the tribe was abandoned and that everyone was cared for. But in boom era, that is, we're talking about Mecca here, newly wealthy from the caravan trade and management of the pilgrimage to the Kaaba sanctuary, the old values had been seriously eroded. In just a few decades, wealth had become concentrated in the hands of a few. It was every man for himself, and an orphaned infant, no matter how well born, was more burden than blessing. At least, the child's gender offered some protection. If Muhammad had been born female, he might have been left out in the desert for elements or predators to dispose of, or even quietly smothered at birth, since the focus on male heirs meant that female infanticide was as high in Mecca as Constantinople, Athens, and Rome, a practice the Quran was to address directly and condemn repeatedly. As it was, Muhammad seemed destined to be what his Meccan opponents would later call him, a nobody. And this destiny seemed only to be confirmed by the fact that for the first 5 years of his life, he would be raised by what the Quraysh elite regarded as another kind of nobody, a Bedouin foster mother far from Mecca and what was thought of as civilized society. Halima was his foster mother. She had taken Muhammad despite the fact that he was an orphan, but there were other reasons too. Her family saw the child as a kind of good luck charm, allowing them to thrive despite the ongoing drought. The drought was terrible in those times. She would say, "We had recognized this as a bounty from God for 2 years until I weaned him. Then we brought him to his mother in Mecca, though we were most anxious to keep him with us because of the good fortune he brought us. I said to her, "It would be best if you were to leave your little boy with us until he is older, safe from diseases here in Mecca." And we persisted until she agreed. So on the one side, this peasant woman was crafting her argument to keep the child with her, but at the same time you can imagine the tearful mother reaching her arms out to her toddler and hugging him close. She is torn between the desire to have him with her and also concern for his well-being. And so she let him go. So this was the beginning of Muhammad's life, and I will tell you the rest of the story in the next podcast.